Hi, everybody. David Noor back with another episode of our Intelligent Growth with my business partner, Jen Cords. Hello, Jen.
Hi, Nora. Great to be here.
I'm excited to share our discussion recently with a prospective client on really this developing a solid foundation for revenue operations or RevOps in a enterprise go-to-market strategy. So to give our audience some context, and if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, we often talk about revenue operations as a strategic value enabler. It is best known in the kind of the tech space. A lot of our clients are in that hyper growth B2B SaaS enterprise tech space. Think of cybersecurity, think of fintech, think of a lot of those kind of more mature, more seasoned startups, right? But recently we had a conversation with a very large enterprise. This is a multinational, multi-billion dollars in revenue. I think like 15,000 employees, a global company. And Jen and I started talking about what are the differences, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities when it comes to this idea of revenue operations within a large enterprise. So in this episode, we thought we'd talk about some of those. And Jen, I've got page and a half of notes from our conversation, and it was a really interesting discussion about comparing and contrasting what some of these, again, hyper growth or even mid-market companies, the challenges they face, the opportunities they face, and all the resources and the complexity and maturity of a large enterprise. So that's what we're going to talk about. Jen, anything to start out with or any opening comments before we jump into the questions?
Well, one of the things that came up from our conversation was that as organizations grow and mature, sort of that foundation that was set early on is just carried through. And one of the things we've talked about in previous episodes as well is just this idea of digital duct tape, where the tech stack or processes or additional business units are just sort of tacked on, not necessarily in an intentional way. And so from those conversations to this conversation, it just kind of carried through some of those similar themes.
That's exactly right. And regrettably, and this is gonna be the case. A lot of times great ideas are started by individuals who, for whatever reason, they transfer out, they leave the company, they leave the industry, and their vision, their stewardship of that tech or that approach of how we should solve that problem kind of tends to go out the window with them. And everybody else is left holding this regrettably tech bloat. I first heard of that expression from Jen. This tech bloat kind of takes over, and they're trying to make the best of it. They're trying to figure out how to, again, Frankenstein this thing together that different people have just kind of added on to over the years, and it just becomes unmanageable, and it becomes really a great opportunity to dial in, recalibrate, use whatever analogy you want, of really get it realigned with the business outcomes. And that's a big part of our conversation, big part of our focus. We had a great conversation with a CRO yesterday, and his comment was, my only interest in RevOps is how will it contribute to the business outcomes, to the vision of the business, of where we're going and how we're going to get there. So Jen, let's start with some attributes. Can you comment on, probably top three that really set an enterprise? And again, I'm talking about large, Fortune 1000 enterprise environment, RevOps environment, apart from either some of the hyper growth clients we've worked with, or even some of the mid-market clients and companies that you and your team have worked with and you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest difference, or one of the biggest differences, is just the environment that you're working in. It's more of a complex ecosystem with the different business units, with various offices that may have their own sort of microcosm of culture or leadership. And so it's just that managing that complexity at a very broad scale is number one, the biggest difference. Number two, I would say the different agendas. So like I mentioned, the business units in the various places, they may have different KPIs between different offices. Each business unit has different things that they're being held to. They also have different competencies. So if there's not a repeatable, scalable way to do things, they will all do it themselves or do it in their own way. And then the other one would be just that tech bloat and that overcomplicated tech stack. When you have those different business units and there's not someone marshaling everybody towards a common outcome, you can get a lot of Wild West, as we call it, and digital duct tape, where people have just tacked on tools that work for them that may not even be known across the other business units.
Yeah, great points. And again, our discussions, I captured those BUs, and the BU silos often happens because they sell a very specific product or service to very different buyers. So they're almost like a sliver of the bigger business. In many ways, they actually, you and I have seen this where they operate, or they feel like they're separate companies. They might have the same logo, but these people sell these products and to this industry, and these people sell a very different product to a different industry, but they have the same logo. So they literally look and feel like separate companies under the same umbrella. Now add mergers and acquisitions, add startups within the large enterprise, add digitization, and add automation, and now we've got a separate BU that is an overlay, and it just creates kind of organizational complexity, which, as you mentioned, processes just go haywire. In terms of competing agendas or independent agendas, their go-to-market motion, you mentioned, is again very specific around a product or service to that buyer. So they're doing their thing. The problem is, again, it gets completely misaligned with the bigger picture, bigger vision. And hence you see very different set of competencies and capabilities and understandings of market dynamics. And then last but not least, the tech stack. You also talked about data maturity. We've seen some BUs that are really mature in their how they capture, analyze, report, dashboards of data, and others wouldn't know what data was if it was water and it fell out of a boat. So you really get the spectrum. Talk about that data maturity for a second.
Data maturity comes down to leadership in a way, just because how that leader wants to visualize what is being done, how they hold their teams accountable to the actions and behaviors that they're needing completed, really then drives what the data is. And so if the leader is only looking for 3 fields, but there's 20 fields to be filled in, the salespeople are going to, or whoever is filling in that data, they're going to fill in those 3 fields and be very accurate on just those 3. The rest of them, they may just put in garbage, not realizing what that garbage or that non-data actually is going to do in the long term. And so that data maturity really comes from understanding the holistic need of data, as well as that cross-functional capability. And so, like you said, a lot of these departments have been overlays, or there's management structures that are overlaid on top of these things, trying to create that consistency and create that uniformity. But that also then comes with 20 extra fields in Salesforce, and those various business units are like, well, that doesn't impact me, so I'm not going to fill it in properly, not knowing that it may actually impact support or the technicians or whomever. And so having that holistic view of this is what everybody needs is really important. And that data maturity and understanding, I put this data in, how is it impacting the outcome that we're after, is really important. And that really does come down to leadership, not only telling them you must do this, but also giving them the why. And so making sure that everybody understands the why behind what they're doing, not just you need to do X.
We've recently partnered with a fabulous company called Versalytics here in town, and Jeff Huckabee and that whole team is really supporting our BizOps function. And I've seen a great spectrum of their data maturity as companies kind of grow. And you're exactly right. Leadership drives a lot of that, and they put in the priority and the resources to really help the organization make more data-driven decisions in how they go to market and how they support their customers and how and where they choose to invest. And we'll share that in our blog with the audience at norgroup.com or in our forum. And it's just a really fascinating, again, look at that data maturity spectrum, if you will. So Jen, with those different attributes between RevOps within a large enterprise versus a hyper growth or even mid market, what do they do next? What's the answer for many of these organizations?
The first answer would be to hire a VP of Ops, VP of RevOps specifically, with a mandate to own and lead and be the steward of all technology, capability, and processes across the entire organization. And what I mean by that is they need to not just be this centralized department like IT that's off in a corner and they roll out technologies on an ad hoc basis. They need to be visible in each of the business units, but they need to be the ones marshaling and driving the company forward from that cross-functional alignment perspective while maintaining the individuality of each of those business units. And so it's that very high level 10,000 foot view. This is where we're going and this is why, and this is what it's going to do for us in the end. So that business outcome, but then also that very tactical, each business unit has their needs and their KPIs and their own agenda, making sure that that's brought into that broader picture. And so it's somebody who has to be a visionary, but also understand the tactical day-to-day that also needs to be executed.
Will parting the Red Sea be part of the job description?
Absolutely. And so will flying, and so will magic and teleportation. Like all of these things are going to be part of that job description. And really, we've talked about it in previous episodes and just in ongoing conversations. A lot of times it's a unicorn that people are looking for. Everybody, like the job descriptions that we've seen and looked at, they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink in those job descriptions, asking for 10, 15 years of experience on all these technologies and admin certifications and like the different force management and sales methodologies and those sort of things. You're not necessarily going to get somebody that has all of those attributes. The best person that you can get for that is someone who, like I said, is visionary, but also understands that tactical day-to-day. And they will then surround themselves and build a team that will then support the agenda that they need to do and need to execute.
Unfortunately, in several conversations with BU leaders, the individuals in these roles are seen as business inhibitors, not business enablers. I've literally had conversations with BU leaders of, that conversation is dead on arrival if you approach that person with a suggestion or recommendation, or, that group is so rigid, it's their way or no way. And it's unfortunate because just that they're not seen as an enabler of the business where RevOps could absolutely be. They're seen as another roadblock. They're seen as another, traditional or typical IT function of we'll get to it in 2030, even though I needed it 15 minutes ago, and it will take an act of Congress to get it approved. And that doesn't have to be the case. So what's the biggest challenges? You alluded to some of this previously, but talk about the biggest challenges this role kind of faces.
So one of the biggest challenges is that governance, and where do they sit within the organization, and what level of control do they have over everything? To your point, they are a lot of times viewed as that tactical IT department that mandates something from their ivory tower, and everybody else just has to kind of go with it. So that would be number one. And number two, I would say, is team. How do you then structure that team? Because that's centralized, off in a corner in their own world isn't going to work for the entire organization. At an enterprise, because you have different business units, because you may have different offices, global offices. We've seen this with several large companies that each one of their offices is run very differently. And so you then have an office plus individual business units within said office, and they're all run differently. trying to mandate then an operations function up over the top of all of that isn't going to work. So how you structure the team is then going to be next. And then tech stack, how do you then mandate and how do you then manage a tech stack? Because again, every business unit is going to have their small idiosyncrasies that they need to address with technology sometimes. And so how flexible can you be to make sure that they still have what they need while the organization has its holistic view?
In our conversation, I captured, so love those three: governance, team, and tech stack. Under governance, I captured influencing across BUs, a lot of times without authority. So that BU reporting typically reports up to a BU general manager or BU leader. So you're an overlay, you're a connective tissue, and it really is much more about influence than authority. So uh, both this, I believe, this leader and his or her team really learning how to influence without authority goes a long way. Which you and I are big believers of create pull or gravity. And the best way I've seen people do that is through education, is whether it's a senior executive level. I've talked about this. RevOps seems to continue to be this elusive space that a lot of people don't understand, particularly outside of technology. So educating the senior executives around that 360-degree view of the customer all the way down to frontline contributors, and really demonstrating the strategic value of RevOps. We're going to sell more. We're going to sell more across BUs. We're going to sell more across BUs more profitably. I think we'll get more people's attention of the real value of RevOps versus let me just tell you about this tool or process or how we need to configure the tech stack. You're going to lose me at hello at that level.
Well, and I would almost go just a step further. It's not influence without authority. It's influence without a competing authority. Like the RevOps person needs to be seen as a partner for that business unit leader and the business unit as a whole. And so it's not corporate, quote unquote, coming in and mandating something. It is a person that's part of the team that's in there with you, wanting you to be successful and not going to be throwing up roadblocks. And so it's not necessarily without authority. It's without a competing authority.
Love that. And to build on that, the notion of what, corporate is here and corporate's going to tell us how to do what we do. I think it also goes to the team comment you made. If it's a centralized, the what's the old adage that the emperor is far and the mountains are high, right? If corporate is far, I can ignore that. But if the team is decentralized and it's embedded, as a partner within the BUs, yet, reporting back to a kind of a core team, as you mentioned, I think it allows you to both collaborate across BUs, but also better align the outcomes that the BUs are after. One of our clients really wants to double down on their existing customer relationships, and they want to elevate their role from transactional selling to much more of that trusted advisor. Again, the tech sector will roll their eyes at that expression because they've been doing that for years and they're trying to do more of a solution sell. That is becoming much more prevalent in a lot of enterprise, more mature. Think of industrial manufacturing. Think of logistics and transportation. Think of, again, a lot of mature companies and mature industries who've been around a lot longer than a lot of these startups have now, and they're just dramatically more complex, now trying to elevate that strategic advisor, that trusted advisor role within their existing relationships. They need to collaborate much more effectively, impactfully, and align across these very distinct BUs. The other thing that I talked about on the tech stack was modular. I love that approach, where I think you said something like, there's a definitive set of standards. Let's just say 80%, but there's still some flexibility in the nuances of that BU. Talk about that right mixture for a second.
Yeah, so the organization as a whole needs to have that standardized set of data, and it's not always the answer is not always just export it to some data team and they'll clean it up and make sense of it and all of those things. The technologies across the organization really need to be consistent at that sort of center spoke. If you think of it like a wheel, the center area needs to be the same for everybody. And then based on where they are, what their goals are, what their outcomes are, what they do, because you're not going to have your service technician business unit doing the same thing or using the same technology necessarily as your enterprise sales or your sales organization. They're going to use similar things. There's a crossover there, but they're not going to use the same technologies because one's going to need sort of a ticketing system and the other one's going to need a contracting system. You're not going to find the same solution there. So you do need to have that flexibility, but they all need to come back to that center spoke and really integrate as seamlessly as possible into that center area while maintaining those nuances of location or business objective.
Got it. So complex enterprise environment, they hire a VP of ops to really function across BUs. This person is challenged with governance, a captured team, a captured tech stack. Is this the right time for an independent perspective, almost like a snapshot or a baseline of this is really what's happening across your environment?
It would be the right time for an assessment and an external assessment. And the reason why it would be better to have an external assessment versus an internal person doing the assessment is most organizations are understanding of a consultant coming in and asking those questions and asking things that may be uncomfortable, and there is no level of bias. The external person has no horse in this race, whereas an internal person, they may be roadblocked by you don't need to know that, you're not in my business unit, etc. So you get away from some of those cultural roadblocks by having an external party come in and do it, because they also will then take it with a lens of what's the main outcome that the business is after versus the agendas of someone internal, because that internal person is going to report up somewhere and it could be finance or whoever. And then those questions are being seen as the agenda of whoever that person reports to. So an external lens is going to be much more agnostic to the business and the various agendas within those business units.
Love that. And again, you and your team do this baseline assessment. I guess where within 30 to 45 days, you look at processes, you look at capabilities, you look at the tech stack. What are the deliverables from the time you and your team spend? I mean, you get sysadmin. I mean, we sign pretty elaborate NDAs, but you and your team get sysadmin access and really look at not just what they tell us, but what they're doing in their environments and the connectivity of these different platforms. And by the way, how they do what they do across BU. So what are the deliverables from your time with them?
Yeah. So as we're coming in, we always assume best intentions because everybody gets busy. Everybody does have those agendas. Everybody's trying to boil the ocean sometimes. And so in that 30 to 45 days, we do get sysadmin access. We then are asking questions of the various teams. So the frontline people who are inputting the data, but also then the people who are managing that tech stack and aligning what's being done with how it was intended to be done. And so one of the things that we produce from this 30 to 45 days is just a process map and an alignment analysis, because it's really important to make sure that the tech and what's being done is an enablement of the business. And so that process map really then captures how each business unit is achieving their outcomes. And we usually do find trends within the various different business units. But then we also find some outliers. And so it's really just capturing all of that data into one place. So then we can ensure that the company is all moving forward in a unified fashion versus being siloed. So then the next thing that we look at is then the capabilities of the various teams, not only the operations function, but also the capabilities within each one of the business units. How is leadership treating data and the data governance? Is there some work that needs to be done there? Is there an operations person that understands the business outcome that that team is actually trying to achieve? Or are they just contributing to the noise? So really looking at that capabilities of the people on those teams and in those business units, and then creating a roadmap. So it's the actual deliverable is called a capabilities elevation roadmap. And so it's looking at where they are today and then looking at where they need to be based off of their business outcome and giving them a path to get there. It could be the right people with the right skills, but maybe they're in the wrong jobs, or maybe they do have a gap within their hiring and they need to bring somebody else in to help shore up what they're trying to achieve. And then the third outcome and deliverable that we create in our process is your system architecture and a gap analysis. So having a holistic view and that complete view of everything that's going on within the organization is really important, not only to keep the business running effectively, but also when a business unit is wanting to add a technology into the stack, understanding the ripple effects that it'll have across the organization and across the data, really, when that technology is added.
Love that. So I captured process map, I captured capabilities elevation, and then sys architecture. What does that give the customer? How do you boil this down to kind of what's next for them?
Yeah. So what's next for them after we do our assessment, we create a list, if you will, of short, medium, long-term priorities. So it's the top 3 to 5 things in the short term, which is within the next 6 months, that the company should tackle to help move them forward. Then the medium term priorities is 6 to 18 months. Longer term is 18 plus. And we provide them recommendations on what they need to do across the processes, capabilities, and the tech stack in each one of those short, medium, long term. And they can take those recommendations, and if they have a team internally, they can implement them themselves. They can take our recommendations and go work with someone else. But we also feel that because we've just done this analysis and we're now in their systems, we're actually positioned best to help them with that, with those priorities. And so we always do love taking on some of that work for clients, but it's really up to the client what they want to do with those recommendations next.
Got it. So we just gave them a roadmap. We gave them our best recommendation of what they need to focus on. You actually say there's a bigger roadblock, obstacle, opportunity. What's the bigger picture? What's the bigger issue that they need to really focus on?
Yeah, so the advent of RevOps and what its true intention is really a realignment of how companies do what they do. And so it's a realignment and reimagining the way marketing, sales, and customer success work together. But then when you take that and you elevate it to a enterprise level initiative, it then becomes a cultural shift for that organization. And that's the bigger play. And so instead of having the organization be siloed and have these little microcosms within that same logo, it's really an intentional shift to try and unify across an organization and have a customer experience be consistent across business units and in all the various offices that an enterprise may be in.
And I love our discussion in the cultural shift. We came up with 10 attributes that are really critical. You want to yin and yang those together?
Sure.
So I'll start with the first one.
Okay.
I've always said if the ship doesn't understand where we're headed, any direction will do. So it's really important for our audience that every organization, every leader really starts with a clear vision and purpose for revenue operations. As Jen mentioned, this isn't another department, function, overhead because we have nothing else to do. No client has ever told us we've got so much money to waste, it's obscene. So let's just go stand up a RevOps function. It is unequivocally an enabler of more intelligent, more profitable growth by creating a seamless integration between, Jen mentioned, marketing, sales, customer success, products, the service function, onboarding, really creating impact from our product solutions. It is as holistic view of that customer being better off because of us than we've ever seen in any other function. So that vision, that purpose for RevOps has to be crystal clear. That's number one. Jen, number two?
Yeah, number two is leadership's commitment to that 360-degree view of the customer and making sure that everyone knows what that view should be and they're marshaling towards it. And so it's that proactively looking for opportunities to delight. It's not just being reactive, and it's not just staying in your lane, if you will. That knowledge and that leadership across business units is really important, always centering around that customer experience and that customer journey. And what is it that customer may need next is a really big part of that. And leadership commitment to making that happen is really important.
I want to add to that the analogy that it's very difficult to think about sprinklers when you're always walking around with a fire extinguisher. On that analogy, it doesn't take much courage to go buy a bunch of fire extinguishers, right? I can go to Costco and beyond my need to walk up and down every aisle to just see what else I have to have, I can pick up a fire extinguisher. If you think about what it takes to install sprinklers, if you haven't built the building yet, it's the foresight to realize. But if you build the building and you try to put it, you have to rip things up. You have to pull plumbing. It's massively disruptive to how people work or may live in that building. It takes real courage. So leadership commitment, I would add, takes courage to really implement and really support this notion that Jen brought up of that 360-degree view of the customer. Three is effective and consistent communication. Anytime Jen and I walk into an organization and we hear us and them versus we challenges, we opportunities, you kind of hear that they're not on the same page. You hear that they're not rowing with the same velocity and veracity in the same direction. So the sooner we can effectively and consistently communicate, here's how we'll get there together. Here's how we need to address this we issue or we challenge or we opportunity. The more you're going to, and it's going to lead nicely into kind of the next topic, but you've got to consistently communicate. You've got to clearly and effectively communicate where we're going, how we're going to get there. Four?
Yeah, four, like you alluded to, is inclusivity and that cross-functional understanding. And so, yes, each business unit has their own agenda, but really understanding how they fit into that broader picture, how they fit into the bigger organization, and some of those challenges, and being willing to share their learnings that could be applied in a similar yet different way to a different business unit, really then helps elevate what it is the company is doing and how they're doing it, instead of keeping everybody separate. And so that inclusivity, that cross-functionality, that understanding of what the different departments do and those adjacencies will also then help when someone, for example, is in one department, is having a conversation with a customer that maybe they've already bought a solution and this customer has a problem still that needs to be solved, and this organization can solve it. It then that person, that internal seller, has the awareness of, oh, I know Joe over in XYZ department. He could help you. Let me make an introduction for you. So then you're putting yourself in the customer's shoes and helping them solve their problem, and maybe even their customers' problems. And so it's really then becoming a partner to your customers versus just being a vendor. And so that cross functionality and that understanding and engagement across the different business units really can create some opportunities that wouldn't come otherwise.
And when you talk about engaging cross BUs and inclusive, two things come to mind. One is, think of organizations you've acquired. A lot of our enterprise clients are doing a lot of acquisitions, and we continue to see M&A be fairly prevalent. So don't forget the people we've just acquired. One, two. We were recently on a call with a smaller BU of a large enterprise, and they made the comment that how often they feel like they're not included in the class picture. So regardless of, as Jen mentioned, regardless of the size of the BU, making sure that their needs are part of the conversation becomes incredibly felt by them, that we're actually part of the company and we matter and we contribute. So absolutely build on that. So we're talking about 10 attributes of cultural shift in really elevating revenue operations or RevOps as a strategic asset. 5 is really training and development. So you have to both from your documentation and videos, think of resources, think of training sessions. You've got to level up the skills, the knowledge, the understanding of the broader population into the impact. They're not going to care about the nitty gritty. A lot of them honestly don't want to know. It's like long distance phone calls. I don't want to know how it works. I just want it to work. The other thing we're big advocates of, and Jen and her team are masterful at this, how do we leverage automation to save keystrokes? I wasn't hired to be a data entry person. So the fact that you want me to fill out 27 fields in Salesforce, it is never going to happen. So how do we leverage automation to pre-populate some of these things that are, I wholeheartedly agree with Jen, are critical, and yet the training and development has to raise the bar on my understanding of why we do this. How do I do this most efficiently? By the way, don't forget their favorite radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? Why would I do this? Where would I get value from doing this? If you don't translate that training and development into what's in it for them, again, they'll go through it because they're held hostage. By the same token, the impact of that training is never going to be materialized. So that's 5. Yep.
I would also add to that the training and development needs to be semi-personalized to those different business units, because how something is done may not be the same everywhere. And you can't just, the training and development can't be done off in a corner and then rolled out to all the teams uniformly. And so it's taking in those uniquenesses of each business unit in that training and development to make sure, to your point, what's in it for them, what's in it for that business unit is then seen in the training and development. Because if it's not, they're going to see that training module and be, okay, we still do it this way. And they're not going to actually adopt it in the way that you're wanting them to.
Got it. Let's go with number 6.
Yeah. So number 6 is recognition and rewarding. A lot of enterprise companies don't necessarily celebrate those small successes and those positive wins, not just within the business units, but also cross-functionally. When a big deal is signed by a certain business unit, share that information out across the organization, not just the what, but then also the how, and how it impacted the organization in a really positive way, and sharing some of those learnings, because those learnings can then be applied, maybe modified a little and then applied elsewhere. But celebrating those small successes, not just the big ones, and do it more consistently. So not just at the annual SKO or at the President's Club dinner or wherever you celebrate them today, but we've seen in a lot of organizations creating a Slack channel if they're a Slack organization, or a Teams channel if they're a Teams organization, and it's just a wins channel, and the wins are posted, and people can then jump in, congrats, that's really awesome. And so you get sort of those accolades and those pats on the back, even when you're not physically in the same location.
And becomes momentum, right? People feel good about themselves and they feel like we're making progress on this key effort. And I think it's critical. 7, consistency and inspecting what you expect. So the actions, the decisions, what is said unequivocally has to be consistent with what is done. Otherwise, you're going to erode trust, you're going to erode credibility, you're going to erode repute. So one of the biggest challenges we see in organizations are people who ask for A and they measure, they compensate, they highlight, they celebrate B. And you get this disconnect of, wait, you asked me to do this, but you don't care about, or you, more importantly, you highlight your favorite child, right? By putting somebody else on a pedestal who did something very different. So they again, I want to reiterate, what is said and what is done has to be congruent, has to be consistent. Otherwise, the credibility and trust of that RevOps function goes out the window. Jen, number 8.
Yeah, so number 8 is really a feed forward mechanism. A lot of companies and organizations look backwards, and that is great to understand where you've been and how you got there, but you really then need to look forward as well. And having that input on almost a more real-time basis that moves the organization forward in a positive way is important. And so one of the things that my team and I do is creating that. We do call them feedback mechanisms, but it's a loop basically of information that is shared bidirectionally between teams. So marketing and sales and customer success and product, making sure that what's being heard in those various functions is shared back or even forward to the various other departments, so they are better armed with information to help the customer, help their end user achieve the outcome that needs to be there. And so making sure that that mechanism exists across all business units, and across all levels of the organization, not just the tactical frontline, but also then back up to the executive team, having those wins and those that feedback loop and that information sharing mechanism, if you will, across the entire organization just makes everybody smarter, because now they'll be they won't hear about it 6 months from now. They'll actually hear about it in real time almost and be able to take action on it to maybe improve their own business unit or change a process or adopt something that's really been working, that's resonating within their customer base. They could then try it. And so really creating that mechanism within the organization is important.
I wrote down in my notes, constructive, positive, forward motion.
Yes.
And I think that's when that feed forward is most impactful. 9, we captured adaptability and accountability. So as Jen mentioned, you have to learn. You have to adapt. If RevOps is seen as rigid, if it's seen as a conversation killer, conversation non-starter, their way or the highway, you're not going to get the buy-in. So agility is really important. Adaptability to the needs of the business are important. Most RevOps leadership we've seen certainly have a playbook of how they believe things should be done, and we're big fans of that. By the same token, that playbook cannot be, the 10 commandments chiseled on a stone tablet. The ability to adapt in particularly the needs of the business unit become critical. Jen, you're going to bring us home with 10.
Before I jump to 10, just a comment on the adaptability side. We've talked about it in previous episodes. That playbook, not only can it not be rigid, it also can't be a set it and forget it. The RevOps function can't come in and just implement something once. As that organization grows and scales, as additional business units are added, taking into account those changes needs to come into play, and modifying maybe how they're doing things, how the data is then transferred, et cetera. So that flexibility and just that constant reevaluation of, is this actually achieving what we're wanting it to achieve, is going to be really important. And so number 10 is just patience and persistence with a culture shift. Culture is intentional. It's an everyday task. And again, it's not something that leadership can just mandate. It is something that has to be seen and felt and heard from top down, side to side. And it takes a level of maturity. And in our conversation, you said it takes adulting. And as funny as that may sound, it's true, because you have to consistently advocate. You have to consistently reinforce. And it takes time. It's not going to be, well, we've implemented our culture today, everybody's going to adopt it and live by it tomorrow. It is, like I said, an everyday thing. You have to set the standard and then hold everybody accountable to that standard. And it takes reinforcement, and it takes an environment of trust that, like, if I reported up to David, I could hold him accountable just as he could hold me accountable to that culture. So it's agnostic to the level within the organization and what business unit you're on. This is how this organization runs, and everybody needs to be able and willing to hold each other accountable to that, and just make sure that the standard isn't lost.
For our audience, if you joined us late, you missed a good one. We've been talking a lot about creating a solid RevOps foundation in an enterprise go-to-market strategy. And in particular, I think we spend a little bit of time on the need for a cultural shift. Jen and I outlined 10 attributes that we've captured. Just a quick recap: clear vision and purpose for RevOps, leadership commitment, number 2, 3, effective and consistent communication, 4, engaging cross BUs and really being inclusive, 5, training and development, 6, recognition and rewarding, 7, consistency and inspecting what you expect, 8, feed forward mechanism, 9, adaptability and accountability, 10, patience and persistence. This is not for the faint at heart. This is not an overnight, in the Matrix movie vernacular, blue or red pill that gets done immediately. It's intentional, it's strategic, and it is absolutely led by courageous leadership who believes that 360-degree view of the customer will help the organization become materially better and add unbelievable value. Jen has also pointed out that a lot of organizations leave revenue on the table because they don't have a solid RevOps foundation. So we hope this has been useful to you. Jen, any closing comments?
I would just say start small and tackle one thing at a time, and just be really intentional and have those hard conversations with your peers on where the company needs to go. And if you aren't already aligned or even talking to other business unit leaders, just reach out and have a coffee chat, get familiar with who they are and what they do. And maybe you'll find some of those synchronicities organically.
So on behalf of Jen Cordes, I'm David North. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Intelligent Growth. Join us each Tuesday at noon Eastern. I've been interviewing a lot of CMOs, CROs for my Forbes column. We're going to have a number of those folks on. Steve Hardy is a longtime friend and the chief marketing officer at Profix. He's going to join us and talk about thriving amid continued uncertainty. We've got a lot of great episodes coming up, so I hope you'll mark your calendar. Tuesdays at noon Eastern for Intelligent Growth. We also repurpose these live streams into our podcast, so feel free to search for Intelligent Growth wherever you consume podcasts. And until next time, Jen and I will see you soon. Thanks, everybody.